It's fantastic. Hi everyone, I'm Jacob, I'm the Cowhat Librarian, and tonight is another one of the ones I've been waiting for. One of the ones in my looking forward to 2023 video. It is a semi-autobiographical graphic novel by the incredibly talented Dan Santat, A First Time for Everything. So, when Dan was in middle school, he had a chance to take a trip. Not just any trip, not a trip to the local convenience store or amusement park or even state capital. It was a school-related trip to Europe, where he would spend a few weeks in Europe, going from country to country and seeing all sorts of different things. And after some embarrassing things that happened in middle school that are flashed back to throughout the book, Dan wasn't really sure about it. He hummed and hawed, and his mom found out about it by accident and asked if he planned to go. And he sort of said, well, I was thinking I'd hang out here and, I don't know, do stuff. And his mom surprised him and said, no, I think you should go. You see, Dan's mom had lupus, an autoimmune disorder that made it very, very hard for their family to do much. They stayed very, very close to home. Dan helped out with things like shopping and such just because his mom had a hard time doing it herself. And she said he needed to go on this trip. He needed to do something amazing like this while he was young, when he had an opportunity, because you never know what might happen in the future. And so Dan packed up his clothes and packed a sketchbook, and off he went. And he met up with a bunch of other kids his age. Dan was 13 at the time when he took this trip in 1989. And the trip was chaperoned by his speech instructor, who was the cause of some of his embarrassment previously. When there was an assembly where kids were rowdy, she had booked the end of the assembly for students who worked with her giving speeches and stuff to present to the class. Well, Dan had to do it, and it was a disaster, and he was heckled for it incessantly. And she's one of the supervisors for this trip. Well, they had all sorts of places. They had Germany, where the kids who are at least 14 years old get to try beer, and Dan assures them that he is 14, even though that's a couple months in the future, so he can try it. He, at one point, has to steal a bicycle and run away from a bunch of punks to get home to the family he's staying with safely. He has a crush on a girl named Amy, who's also taking that trip. She's from a completely different part of the country, but they bond on this trip. And Dan runs into some issues because some of the people on the trip are pushing him. Hey, we think Amy likes you. Hey, I bet you have a crush on Amy. You should go talk to her. Dan has to deal with those competing pressures while also dealing with another person on the trip. A girl that he previously asked out in response to similar pressure in the past, who got angry and blew him off. And his feelings had been hurt about it ever since, and she had basically ignored him or acted disgusted when he was around ever since. It was great. Dan Santat is incredibly talented. I've said this so many times before, and I'm not going to quit saying it. He's an amazing, amazing illustrator with just expressive faces. He has his own unique style. Now, he did work with a colorist on this one, Abe Erskine, who Abe must have studied Santat's other works, because the coloring looks a lot like the style Santat uses in his own illustrating and coloring for picture books. But the art style is just wonderful. It matches the story and the sentiment so well. It was great. And the story itself was compelling. Now, this is mostly autobiographical. In the author's note, Santat talks about how he did take this trip in 1989, and he did meet Amy, and many of the events did happen. There were a few differences. A major event late in the book happened earlier in real life with a different participant. But by and large, it's the story of what happened, and it's compelling. I thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyed it. The only graphic novels that I could think of as sort of read-alikes for this are two other autobiographical ones. The Stupidest Idea Ever by Jimmy Gownley, where he talks about his history with comics and why he decided to become a cartoonist, and Dragon Hoops by Gene Lun Yang, talking about his year as a math teacher in high school and following along with the school's basketball team through the year. They were both autobiographical things that talked about a major reason why that person turned to a life in comics and cartooning and illustrating. And this one is in that same sort of mold. This talks a bit about why Santat ended up drawing so much. And part of it was that his camera wasn't working that well on this trip, so he took a lot of time sketching things instead. Now, there are spoilers ahead, and I do have to talk about the one teeny tiny deal breaker. The deal breaker is this. I wanted more. It was great. It was compelling. It was heartfelt. I felt bad for Dan. I cringed at a couple things that happened to him, and I was cheering for him every time he made a decision in this trip to embrace life and live it to the fullest, to go talk with Amy and hang out with her, to have that beer in Germany when he was younger than he should have been, to head out late at night, to sneak into Wimbledon to see it. It was great, and I wanted more. I didn't want the story to end. I wanted more side stories about the escapades. I wanted to hear more of the bickering on the bus between some of the students. I wanted more. And so in the end, he and Amy figure out that they do like each other quite a bit, and they spend a lot of time together. And Dan almost wrecks that, because he sort of says, well, what's the point? We're going to be, heading in opposite directions in couple days, and we're probably not going to see each other again. Why bother getting close? And Amy's feelings are justifiably hurt, and Dan isn't feeling too great about things either, but he comes to his senses, and they make up, and they make the most of the time they have, including sneaking into Wimbledon. And they have a touching, heartfelt goodbye, and in the postscript, in the author's notes, Dan reveals that he and Amy wrote to each other for 6 straight years afterwards. They eventually lost touch, but thanks to social media, they found each other again years later and got back in touch, and he still has all of her old letters. Their relationship reminded me a little bit of the very end of The Wonder Years, where Fred Savage's character is narrating what happened in his life afterwards, and that he and Winnie had corresponded for years while she was away at art school. And ultimately both boys ended up with someone else, but they maintained that connection for so long. And it was kind of cool. I love Dan Santat's stuff. If you're in the mood for a travel autobiography in graphic novel form, you cannot go wrong with this. Go borrow it from your local public library. And on that note, if you use and appreciate the services offered by your public library, why not take just 1 minute and tell the powers that be exactly that? Tell a council member, tell your mayor, tell an MLA or an MP. Tell them that you use your public library and you appreciate the services they offer. We're at a time where some public libraries are having trouble finding sustainable funding to continue improving the services that you and I use and appreciate so much. And a few words in the right ears might make a world of difference. And if by some chance you're a library staff member, don't forget, watching my videos counts as professional development time. With that, thank you for listening in on my Santat fanboying. By all means, please like, please subscribe, and please check back and see what else I have to talk about from the Cow Hat Library. Thank you. Bye now.